Elena Vasquez had not slept through a full night in 3 years, not since the divorce, not since the morning she had finally packed a single bag, walked out of the house she had spent 6 years making into a home, and told herself, quietly, firmly, without drama, that she was done. She had said it to herself in the mirror of a gas station bathroom while her hands were still shaking. Done, and she had believed it. The problem with men like Marco Vasquez was that they did not accept the word done. Elena ran an alterations shop on Clement Street, the kind of narrow, quietly busy road where the cafe next door always smelled like cardamom, and the pharmacy on the corner had the same hand-painted hours sign it had displayed for 15 years. Her shop was called Stitch and Thread, a name she had chosen herself, paid to have painted herself, and took a small private satisfaction in every single morning when she unlocked the door. The shop was not glamorous. It was not supposed to be. 2 sewing machines, a long cutting table, a rack of garments waiting to be hemmed or let out or taken in, and a small radio on the windowsill that she kept tuned to a jazz station, because jazz asked nothing of her. 3 years ago she had rented this space with money borrowed from her older sister, Claire. She had paid Claire back within 18 months. That had mattered to her deeply, not the money itself, but what paying it back had meant. It had meant she was standing on her own ground again. She had regular clients now, Mrs. Petrov, who brought in her late husband's old suit jackets to be altered for her teenage grandsons, Danny, the bartender from the restaurant 2 blocks over, who needed his uniform trousers taken in every few months, and always arrived with a polite apology for the inconvenience. A rotating collection of people who had found her through word of mouth, because Elena did careful work and charged fair prices, and remembered what people had brought in before. She had, in other words, built something. The something was modest. She knew that. The apartment above the bakery on Hazel Street where she lived was small enough that she could hear the ovens running at 4 in the morning, a low, warm hum that had initially annoyed her, and now, 3 years in, she found oddly comforting. She had a good coat, a reliable bicycle, a small library of paperback novels stacked on her kitchen windowsill. She had dinner with her sister on Thursdays. She had a savings account, with a balance that was not impressive but was, for the first time in her adult life, actually growing. She had, quietly and without celebration, rebuilt herself from almost nothing. And then Marco had come back. Not in a dramatic way. That was the thing about Marco. He had never operated in dramatic ways. He was not a man who raised his voice or slammed doors or made scenes in public. He was precise. He was controlled. He chose his moments the way a chess player chose moves, carefully, deliberately, with the patience of someone who had never once doubted that he would eventually win. The legal dispute had begun almost immediately after the divorce was finalized. There had been a joint savings account, money Elena had contributed to for 5 of the 6 years they were married, money from her work, from the small graphic design contracts she had taken on before the shop, from years of careful, quiet saving. When the marriage ended, Marco had moved that money. Not all of it. Enough of it that the lawyer Elena had hired, a tired but competent woman named Deborah, had looked at the bank statements and pressed her lips together in a way that said more than any words would have. The lawsuit had been running for 2 years. 2 years of filings and counterfilings and postponements, and the particular grinding exhaustion of fighting a legal battle you cannot fully afford against someone who is determined to outlast you. Marco had better lawyers. He had always had better lawyers because Marco had always had more money, because for most of their marriage, Elena had not fully understood where his money came from or how much of it there was, and when she had started to understand, that understanding had been part of what ended everything. She did not think about that part often. She had learned, through the discipline of necessity, not to follow that particular thread too far. What she thought about was the lawsuit. What she thought about was the settlement figure that Deborah had told her, 6 weeks ago, was close. Genuinely, finally close. Marco's lawyers had made a counteroffer that was low but not insultingly low, and Deborah had said she thought, with a little more pressure, they could get to the real number. Elena had said, yes, keep pushing. She had walked out of Deborah's office onto a bright October afternoon, feeling something she did not let herself name too loudly, in case naming it made it disappear. Something that felt, cautiously, like the approaching end of a very long road. Then, the following Tuesday, Marco came to the shop. She heard the door open at 2:20 in the afternoon. She was at the cutting table with a pair of Mrs. Petrov's grandson's trousers, measuring the inseam for the 3rd time, because she always measured twice, and then once more for certainty. She looked up. Marco stood in the doorway with his coat perfectly pressed and his hands in his pockets. He looked, as he always looked, entirely comfortable. That was the thing about him that had once read as confidence, and now read as something else entirely, a quality she no longer had a gentle word for. "You have a client," she said. It was not a question. The shop had a small sign in the window that said by appointment only. He did not have an appointment. "I came to talk," he said. "I have a lawyer for that." "I know you do." He stepped fully inside. He did not close the door behind him. He never closed doors in enclosed spaces. She had noticed that years ago, and filed it away as odd, before understanding, later, that it was calculated. It signaled he was not threatening, that he could leave at any time, that he was simply a reasonable man stopping by for a conversation. "I thought it would be better between the two of us, directly." Elena set down the trousers. She kept her hands flat on the table. "Say what you came to say, Marco." He looked around the shop slowly, the way someone looks at a place they are not impressed by, but are too polished to say so. Then he looked back at her. "Drop the lawsuit," he said. "We are going to reach a number that Deborah calls reasonable and I call generous, and you are going to understand that taking it and closing this chapter is the wisest thing you can do. And if I don't agree..." He smiled. It was a slight smile, controlled and patient. "Elena, look at this." He gestured, mildly, at the shop around him. "You have made a life. I respect that. I do. But you are one person, and you do not have the resources for a prolonged fight. And you and I both know where this ends if you keep pushing." He paused. "No one is going to come help you. You understand that? No one will save you. You are alone in this, and alone is a very uncomfortable place to negotiate from." He said it pleasantly. That was the thing that stayed with her afterward, the thing that turned over and over in her mind, long after he had nodded politely and walked back out into the October afternoon. He had said it pleasantly, the way someone mentions the weather, the way someone states a fact so obvious it does not require any particular emphasis. "No one will save you." Elena stood at the cutting table for a long moment after the door closed. The jazz station played something slow. Outside, the street carried on. A woman walked past with a stroller. A delivery truck idled at the corner. A man at the cafe table across the narrow road sat with an espresso and a folded newspaper and did not look up. She picked up the trousers. She went back to measuring the inseam. Her hands, she noticed, were completely steady. That steadiness was the thing she had fought longest and hardest for. The steadiness was hers. He had not taken it. He would not. But his words sat in her chest like a stone, and she carried them home that evening, up the stairs above the bakery, into her small apartment that smelled like bread and her own small life, and she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold and thought carefully about what came next. She had been alone before. She had built alone before. She had survived alone before. But she was tired. That was the honest truth she allowed herself. Alone in the kitchen with the tea going cold and the ovens humming below and the city going dark outside the window. She was tired in the specific, deep way of someone who has been fighting at full strength for a very long time. She did not know that across the street, at the cafe table, the man with the folded newspaper had not been reading it. She did not know that he had heard every word. She did not know yet that the next chapter of this story was not going to look anything like the chapter she was preparing herself for. She finished the tea. She went to bed. She did not sleep. The man's name was Luca Ferrante, and he had been sitting at that particular cafe table for 40 minutes before Marco Vasquez walked into the alterations shop across the street. He had not chosen the table for any reason related to Elena Vasquez or her troubles. He had chosen it because the chair faced outward, because the espresso at this cafe was prepared without asking him how he wanted it, correctly, which meant strong, and because he liked this particular corner of Clement Street, where the noise of the city thinned into something almost manageable, and nobody bothered him. He was, by most visible measures, simply a man in his late 40s having a quiet Tuesday afternoon. He wore a dark coat. His hair was gray at the temples. He had the kind of face that people found it difficult to describe afterward. Not striking, not ordinary, something in between that the eye slid over without catching. He had cultivated that quality deliberately over many years, the way other men cultivated a tan or a firm handshake. He was not reading the newspaper. He had not been reading it since the door of the alterations shop had opened and the well-dressed man had stepped inside. There was something in the way the well-dressed man moved, that particular ease, that ownership of space, that had snagged Luca's attention the way certain things always snagged it. He had spent decades learning to read the way people moved. The well-dressed man moved like someone who had never once in his life considered the possibility that a room might not welcome him. Luca had known many such men. He had dealt with them in various capacities over the years, not all of which had ended pleasantly for the men in question. Through the large front window of the shop, old glass, slightly wavy, the kind that bends light, he could see the shapes of the two people inside. He could not see the woman's face clearly. He could see enough of her posture to understand that she was not relaxed. He could see enough of the man's posture to understand that he was. The street was quiet enough, and his hearing was good enough, that fragments of the conversation reached him when the October wind cooperated. He heard the tone clearly. You did not always need the words. Then the wind shifted, and he heard 3 sentences with complete clarity, and the third one was, "No one will save you." He lifted his espresso. He drank it. The well-dressed man came out of the shop, nodded at nothing in particular, and walked away up Clement Street, with his hands still in his pockets and his coat still perfectly pressed. He did not look back. Men like that never looked back. Looking back implied the person behind you was worth checking on. Luca set down the cup. He looked at the shop window for a moment. He picked up the newspaper. He read 3 paragraphs of an article about city planning, before he folded it again and placed it on the table beside the empty cup. He left a tip that was precise rather than generous, because generosity drew attention, and he had not survived this long by drawing attention, and he walked away. He did not think about the woman in the alterations shop again that afternoon. He thought about her that evening, briefly, while he was eating alone at a restaurant on Sacramento Street, whose owner greeted him by name and always gave him the corner table without being asked. He thought about her again the following morning. By the 3rd day, he acknowledged to himself that something about what he had witnessed had settled into him in a way that was not going to be dislodged by ignoring it. Luca Ferrante had built his life, the visible parts and the less visible parts, on a small number of principles he held with the certainty other people reserved for religion. One of them was this, that certain things were simply wrong, in the plain, uncomplicated way that a crooked line is wrong, and that a man who could see a crooked line and had the tools to straighten it and walked away anyway was not neutral. He was complicit. He had not arrived at this principle through sentiment. He had arrived at it through years of watching men who believed that power freed them from accountability, and understanding with increasing clarity that those men were mistaken, and that the mistake eventually caught up with all of them. He was not interested in playing that particular game from the same side those men played it. He made 3 phone calls over the following 2 days. None of the calls were long. The people he called were competent and discreet, and did not require lengthy explanations. By the end of the 2nd day, he knew Elena Vasquez's full name, the name of her lawyer, the nature of the lawsuit, the name of her ex-husband, and the broad outline of what Marco Vasquez's financial situation actually looked like, versus what it appeared to look like from the outside. The financial situation was interesting in the way that a complicated knot is interesting, not because you admire it, but because you can see exactly where the pressure points are. He also knew that Elena Vasquez had borrowed money from her sister to start the shop, that she had paid it back, that she had no criminal record, that she had no history of legal problems of any kind before the divorce, and that she had been paying a lawyer out of a personal savings account that was not built for that kind of sustained drain. He sat with this information for 1 more day. Then he contacted a woman named Gloria, who ran a small textile supply business, and who had been supplying fabric to Stitch and Thread since Elena opened. Gloria was not one of his people in any formal sense, but they had known each other for a long time and trusted each other in the careful, limited way that people in adjacent worlds sometimes trusted each other. He asked Gloria to pass a message. The message was simple. He was aware of her situation. He had resources that might be relevant. If she wished to speak, she could call. The card he sent was plain white, matte, with a phone number and nothing else. He sent it, and then put it out of his mind, because whether she called or not was entirely her decision, and he had learned long ago that pushing a door open and then standing in it waiting was not offering someone a choice. It was applying pressure with extra steps. She called on a Friday evening, 4 days after he had sent the card. He answered on the 2nd ring. Mr. Ferrante, she said. Her voice was steadier than he had expected, and he had expected it to be reasonably steady. Ms. Vasquez, I want to be direct with you, she said. I prefer it. I know what kind of man you are. A pause, but not a long one. I did some research after Gloria gave me your card. I know enough. I am not going to pretend otherwise, and I am not going to thank you for the gesture and hang up, because I need to actually understand what you are offering and what it costs before I decide anything. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That is a sensible approach. What are you offering? Not what you might be imagining, he said. I am not offering to do anything that would cause your ex-husband any harm. I want to be clear about that first, because I imagine it is your first concern. It was in the top 3, she said. What I am offering, he said, is to make it known, in the circles where Marco Vasquez operates, that you are someone I am aware of, that your situation is something I have noted, that anyone who involves themselves in making your life more difficult than it already is, will have involved themselves in something larger than they intended. Silence on her end. He waited. That's it, she said. That's it. You're not asking for anything. No. Why? The word was flat and direct. Not suspicious exactly. Testing. Luca considered how to answer honestly. Because I was sitting at that cafe table, he said, and I heard what he said to you. And I have a code, Miss Vasquez. It is not a code that appears in any legal document, or that I can fully explain to you in a phone call, but part of it is that certain things are simply not acceptable to watch and walk away from. Another silence, longer this time. He is not a good man, she said, and there was something exhausted in her voice. Not weak, exhausted. The way someone sounds when they have been explaining a simple thing for a very long time, and nobody has quite understood it. No, Luca said. I noticed. She said she needed to think. He said of course. She called back the following Monday morning at 9:15, and she said yes. Luca made one phone call after that. It lasted 6 minutes. He did not explain himself. He simply communicated, in the indirect and efficient language that his world operated in, that Elena Vasquez was someone whose well-being he had an interest in. The person he called understood immediately. That person would ensure the right information reached the right people. What Luca did next, though, was not the phone call. What he did next surprised even him, slightly. He went back to the cafe on Clement Street on Tuesday morning. He ordered the same espresso. He sat at the same corner table. He waited. He told himself he was simply following a habit, that this cafe was on his way to another appointment, that there was nothing deliberate about it. He was, in certain respects, quite bad at lying to himself, which he considered a useful quality in a person who dealt extensively in the truth-related activities of others. Elena came out of the shop at 10:30 to put new fabric samples in the window display. She was wearing a dark green cardigan, and she had her hair up in the practical, no-nonsense way of someone who needed her hands free for work. She did not look across the street. She arranged the samples with focused attention, the way someone does a task they care about doing correctly, and then she went back inside. Luca drank his espresso. He had not felt a pull toward any particular person in a very long time. He was not entirely sure what to do with the feeling, so he did what he usually did with things he was not entirely sure about. He observed it carefully. He did not act on it. He noted its existence and filed it. He left the cafe. He had 3 meetings that afternoon, none of them pleasant, all of them necessary. He conducted them with his usual precision. On the drive home that evening, his phone buzzed with a message from the person he had called. 3 words, "Message has landed." Luca put the phone down on the passenger seat. He watched the evening city slide past the window. Marco Vasquez, he knew, would have received the message by now through a mutual business contact. The contact would not have explained. Explanation was not the point. The point was that Marco Vasquez would hear a name, and the name would be Luca Ferrante, and whatever Marco Vasquez knew, or suspected or had heard about that name would be enough. Men like Marco operated on the currency of intimidation. They understood, deeply and intuitively, what it felt like to be on the receiving end of a power they could not fully see or measure. It was the only language they genuinely spoke. Luca was fluent. Across the city, in a beautifully appointed apartment that said everything about a man's taste in things and very little about his taste in people, Marco Vasquez was sitting very still with his phone in his hand. reading a message that had come from someone he knew and trusted, and understanding, gradually, with the particular chill of comprehension settling through him, that something had changed. He did not know what, exactly. He did not know how. He did not know who had become aware of Elena's situation, or why that person would have any interest in it. He only knew the name that the message contained, and that name was enough to make him set the phone down very carefully on the glass coffee table and sit in his immaculate living room in the gathering dark, not moving for quite a long time. Elena Vasquez was at her kitchen table, eating soup, and reading a novel she had been working through for 3 weeks. The ovens were humming below. The window was cracked to let in the cool air. She did not know yet what had already begun to shift. She would. The call from Deborah came on a Wednesday morning, 9 days after Luca had sent that message into the world. Elena was steaming a wedding dress, a customer's mother's dress from 23 years ago, being let out and restored for a daughter who had called and cried a little on the phone while describing what the dress meant to her, and Elena had quoted a lower price than she normally would have, and had not mentioned doing so. She was in the middle of pressing the second seam when her phone rang and she saw Deborah's name on the screen. She set the iron down very carefully. "They've come back," Deborah said without preamble. She was a woman who did not waste time on preamble. Elena had come to love that about her. With a new number, a real number this time. Elena sat down on the stool near the cutting table. How real. The full amount. A pause that was short enough to be professional and long enough to be significant. Actually the full amount, Elena, with legal costs on top. They want a signed agreement by the end of next week. The shop was very quiet. The jazz station was playing something with a piano, soft and precise. Elena looked at the wedding dress hanging on the rack across the room, still half-steamed, one sleeve gleaming and one shoulder still creased from 23 years in a box. "Why?" she said, not triumphantly, not even with particular satisfaction, just the word, flat and honest, because she needed to understand it. "Their letter doesn't say why," Deborah said, "but in my experience when someone reverses this completely, and this quickly, something has changed on their end. Something in their calculation." "Their calculation changed," Elena said. "It appears so." Elena was quiet for a moment. She thought about the card with only a phone number on it. She thought about the phone call she had made on a Monday morning 10 days ago, and the voice on the other end that had been steady and direct, and had not asked her for anything she had not offered freely. "Is it a good offer?" she said. "It is an excellent offer," Deborah said. "I would recommend taking it." "Then let's take it." She heard Deborah exhale, the small, contained exhale of a tired lawyer who has spent 2 years fighting a winnable case and is now watching it get won. "I will draft the response this afternoon. Elena, this is good. This is really good." "Thank you," Elena said, "for everything, for not giving up on this." "You paid me not to give up on it," Deborah said, which was technically true, and also not quite the whole truth, because Elena knew that Deborah had taken this case at a reduced rate in the first place, and had logged more hours than she had billed for, because Deborah was a tired, but competent woman, who still, underneath the tiredness, had a strong sense of what was right. Elena hung up the phone. She sat on the stool for a little while, then she stood up, went back to the wedding dress, and finished steaming the second seam. She needed to think carefully about what she owed Luca Ferrante, if anything. That was the question that had been sitting underneath everything since the Monday morning phone call, and now it sat more urgently. He had said he wanted nothing. She believed he meant it, but wanting nothing and owing nothing were different things, and Elena Vasquez had spent her adult life being precise about what she owed people, and to whom, and why. She would not start being imprecise about it now. She sent him a message that evening, short, direct. It said, "The lawsuit has been settled, fully. I wanted you to know." He replied within 10 minutes. "Good." One word. She stared at it for a moment. Then she found herself doing something she had not done in a very long time, which was smile at her phone with genuine warmth, and no particular agenda behind it. She put the phone down and made dinner. He texted again 2 hours later. "If you would like to meet, I will be at the cafe on Clement Street on Tuesday morning at 9. She thought about it. She sat with the thought the way she sat with most things, without rushing, without flinching from the parts that were uncomfortable. She thought about what she knew of Luca Ferrante, which was partly what Gloria had told her, and partly what she had found herself, through careful searching, in the days after she had received his card. She had read 2 news articles, the kind of articles that were careful in their language, that used words like alleged, and associated with, and linked to. She had read between the lines of those articles with the literacy of someone who had spent 6 years married to a man who was also more than he appeared. She was not naive. She had been honest with him about that on the phone. She was not naive, and she was not going to pretend she was walking toward something simple. But she was also 34 years old, and she had spent those years building, surviving, and fighting, and she had earned the right to make her own choices with her eyes open. She replied, "I will be there." Tuesday morning arrived gray and cool, with the smell of rain that had not quite decided to fall. Elena unlocked the shop at 8:30, sorted the morning's work, and at 8:55 hung the back in an hour sign on the door, and walked across the street. He was already there. Corner table, espresso. The folded newspaper she now understood was a prop rather than reading material. He stood when he saw her approaching, a reflex that was too natural to be calculated, and she noted it without comment, and sat down across from him. She ordered tea. He waited for it to arrive before he said anything, which she also noted. "Congratulations," he said, "on the settlement." "Thank you," she said, "and thank you for whatever you did. I had a conversation, a very effective one." He looked at her steadily. He had eyes that were a dark gray-brown, the kind of color that changes slightly depending on the light, and he used them with an economy that she recognized from the other side, her own tendency to observe rather than perform. "You seem steady," he said. "Most people, in your situation, having had that kind of resolution, they would be either very relieved or very angry. You seem neither." "I am both," she said. "I am just also tired, and I have learned over the last few years that tired is not the same as weak, and that I do not have to perform my emotions to prove they are real." He considered that. "No," he said, "you don't." They sat with the tea and the espresso for a moment, and the cafe hummed around them quietly, and outside the window the gray morning moved through its business. "I want to ask you something," Elena said. "Ask." "On the phone, you said you had a code. That part of it was about not walking away from certain things." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "What is the rest of it?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I operate in a world that is complicated. There are parts of it I would not describe to you, and that you would not want described. But I have always believed that the complications of my world should not become someone else's burden, that the people in my vicinity should not pay costs they did not incur." "That's a very careful way to describe it. I am a careful man." "I know." She looked at him directly. "I am a careful woman. I want you to know that I am not sitting here because I am grateful and therefore careless. I am sitting here because I made a decision, with full information, and I would like to understand more about the person I made it with. That is different from being careless." Something shifted, very slightly in his expression. Not softening, that was not quite the word. Something more like a door that is firmly locked, recognizing a key it did not expect. "What would you like to know?" he said. She asked, and he answered. And then he asked, and she answered. It was not a long conversation, perhaps 40 minutes, before Elena stood and said she needed to get back to the shop. But in those 40 minutes they covered ground that most people do not cover in months of acquaintance, because they were both people who had learned that surface-level conversation was a luxury, and that the interesting questions were usually the ones that made both parties slightly uncomfortable. She found out that he had a younger brother who lived in Portland and called him every Sunday, which surprised her. He found out that she had spent 2 years painting before she pivoted to sewing, and that there were still 3 canvases in her apartment that she could not quite bring herself to sell or throw away. She found out that he had grown up without money, in the kind of neighborhood where the routes out were limited, and the routes in were clearly marked, and that he had chosen a particular route out, and that he had done it with intention, rather than desperation. He did not apologize for it. She did not ask him to. He found out that she had known, somewhere in the 2nd year of her marriage, that something was wrong, and that she had spent 3 more years convincing herself that knowing and acting were not the same obligation, and that the thing she had worked hardest to forgive herself for was those 3 years. "You built the shop," he said quietly. "That seems like action to me." "It was," she said. "Eventually." She stood to leave. He stood as she did, At the door of the cafe, she stopped and turned back. "Same time next Tuesday," she said. And the corner of his mouth just barely moved. "Same time," he said. She walked back across the street and into the shop and took down the "back in an hour" sign and went back to the wedding dress, which she was going to finish today, because the daughter was coming on Thursday to try it on. In her chest, the stone that Marco had placed there 14 days ago on a Tuesday afternoon was not gone. She was not naive enough to think it would go quickly, but it was smaller than it had been, and the space around it was occupied now by other things. By the settlement number that Deborah was drafting into a legal document, by the small warmth of a 40-minute conversation that had been surprising in its honesty, by the particular and private satisfaction of a woman who had been told, flatly, that she was alone, and who had been wrong. She had not been saved. She needed to be clear with herself about that. What had happened was something different. What had happened was that someone had held a door open, and she had decided, with full knowledge of what she was walking toward, to walk through it. That was its own thing. That was hers. Across the city, Marco Vasquez was not sleeping well. He had not slept well in 9 days, not since the message, not since his lawyer had called him the following morning, with a tone that Marco had never heard from that particular lawyer before, a tone that could only be described as cautious. They had advised settling. They had used words like broader exposure and reputational risk and unanticipated complications. They had not explained what those words referred to, but Marco, who was a precise and intelligent man in most respects, understood that they referred to a name. He had not looked directly at that name. He had felt its presence the way you feel a large and unpredictable thing standing just outside the edge of your vision. You know it is there, and you understand that the correct response is to move carefully and not to draw attention to yourself. He had agreed to settle. His lawyers had made the call to Deborah. The number they offered had been the full number plus costs, because when you are moving away from something carefully, you do not haggle. He sat in his apartment in the evenings now and thought about how the situation had come to be what it was, and he kept arriving at the same place, the alterations shop on Clement Street, the woman he had thought he understood, and somewhere, he did not know exactly where, but somewhere in the vicinity of that Tuesday afternoon, a problem had started, a variable he had not calculated, a presence he had not seen. He did not know how to fix it. He was not certain it could be fixed. What he knew was that for the moment he would be still, and quiet, and patient. He was good at patience. What he had not yet decided was whether being still and quiet was the same thing as being finished. 3 weeks passed. They were, by the measures Elena used to evaluate weeks, good ones. The settlement money arrived in her account on a Tuesday, 12 days after Deborah sent the signed agreement, which was faster than Deborah had predicted, and which Deborah mentioned with the controlled satisfaction of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that speed in these situations was itself a kind of signal. Elena transferred a portion of it immediately, a new industrial sewing machine she had been putting off buying for 2 years, 3 months of rent paid forward, a small amount into savings. The rest she left where it was and did not think about it too carefully, because she had a habit of not trusting good things until they had been present long enough to prove they intended to stay. She met Luca at the cafe on Tuesday mornings. It had become a thing without either of them formally making it a thing, which was perhaps the most natural way for things to become themselves. They talked for 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. He drank 1 espresso. She drank tea. The conversation moved through topics with the ease of 2 people who had established, early, that they were not going to perform for each other. She learned he had been married once, briefly, in his late 20s, to a woman named Carol, who was now a landscape architect in New Mexico, and with whom he was on terms that he described as cordial, and that she sensed meant something more complex than cordial, but that he had organized into that word for the sake of practicality. He learned that Elena had not been in a relationship since Marco, not because she was afraid, she said, but because she had been busy, and because she did not find most people particularly interesting, and because she had decided, at some point, that the bar for letting someone into her life was higher than it had previously been, and she was not going to lower it for the sake of company. He had looked at her when she said that with the expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of being amused. High bar, he said. The justified bar, she said. She was not going to pretend she did not feel the pull. She was honest about most things, and she was honest about this, at least to herself, in the evenings in her kitchen with the tea and the novel and the ovens below. She felt it clearly and without confusion. A pull that was specific and genuine, and that she was being careful with. The way you are careful with something that could either sustain you or burn you, and that has not yet revealed which it will be. Luca Ferrante was many things. Some of them she knew. Some of them she suspected. Some of them she understood she would probably never fully know, because there were rooms in his life with closed doors, and she had learned enough to know that she was not yet in a position to decide whether she wanted those doors open, or whether, for her own life, they needed to stay closed. She was thinking about all of this on a Thursday evening when Claire called. Claire was Elena's older sister by 4 years, and she had the specific personality type of a woman who had always paid attention to the world around her, with slightly more anxiety than was perhaps necessary, and had gradually, over the decades, come to accept this as a fixed feature of herself, rather than a problem to be solved. She called Elena every Thursday. Usually the calls were warm and long, and full of the comfortable trivia of two sisters who know each other well. This one had a different texture almost immediately. "There is a journalist who called me today," Claire said. Elena set down her fork. "What journalist?" "A man. He said his name was Daniel Ward. He works for the," she named a digital outlet that Elena recognized, mid-size, well-regarded for investigative work. "He said he was doing a story on," a pause, careful, as if Claire was choosing words, "on organized crime connections in the city. And he asked if I knew you." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't interested in speaking about anyone in my family without more information about what the story was." Claire's voice was steady but tight at the edges. "He said it wasn't about you specifically. He said he had a source who had given him information about someone you were connected to." Elena was quiet. "Elena, what is happening?" "I don't know yet," Elena said, "but I think I know where it started." She got off the phone with Claire and sat at the table for exactly 2 minutes. Then she opened her contacts, found the number on the plain white card that she had stored there 3 weeks ago, and called. Luca answered on the second ring, as he always did. "There is a journalist," she said. "His name is Daniel Ward. He works for an outlet called the City Independent. He called my sister today, looking for information about someone I am connected to." A brief silence. Not the silence of surprise, more the silence of someone quickly and efficiently doing several things at once in their head. "When?" "This afternoon. A few hours ago. My sister just called me." "Did the journalist contact you directly?" "Not yet. He may." "He will," Luca said, and his voice was the same as it always was, even, direct, not performing reassurance and not performing alarm. "I would like you to listen carefully. I need to think about this for a short time. Can we meet tomorrow morning rather than Tuesday?" "Yes," she said. 9 o'clock. The cafe. "I will be there." She hung up and sat for a while in the kitchen, not eating the dinner that was still on the table, not reading the novel, just sitting with the information and what it meant. The information meant one thing clearly: Marco. Not because she had evidence, but because she understood how he thought, how he operated, how he responded to loss. She had been watching him do it for 6 years. He was not a man who absorbed defeat and moved on. He was a man who found angles, who waited for the right moment, who exercised his patience like a weapon. He had gone quiet after the settlement because he was calculating, not because he was done. He had found an angle. He had found a journalist and a name, and he was trying to make Elena's association with Luca into a story that would damage both of them without his hands being visibly anywhere near it. She did not feel afraid. She felt, if she was honest, an anger that was almost clean, the pure, clear kind that comes from recognizing something completely. She cleaned up the dinner she had not eaten. She washed the dishes. She went to bed. In the morning she met Luca at 9. He looked the same as he always looked, which was part of what made him what he was, the total absence of visible agitation in a man who had likely, in the hours since they had spoken, been doing a number of things that required significant focus. He had a fresh espresso. Her tea was already ordered. "Tell me what you know," he said. She told him everything Claire had said, word for word, because Elena had always had a strong memory for conversation, and because she had been replaying it since yesterday evening. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I know the outlet," he said. "I know of Daniel Ward. He is legitimate. He is not someone who takes money for stories. He is not someone who writes dishonest journalism, which means that whoever gave him information gave him something he believes to be real." Marco, Elena said. Almost certainly. He did not look surprised. A man who cannot come at you directly finds an indirect route. What do you want to do about it? He looked at her carefully. That, he said, depends on what you want to do about it. Because I want to be clear with you, Elena. This story, if it is written, may be damaging to me. It may also be damaging to you, simply by association. I will not pretend otherwise, and I am not going to make a decision that affects your life without you being fully part of it. She wrapped both hands around the tea. What are the options? I can have a conversation with the relevant people that results in certain information being reconsidered, not suppressed, not threatened, but put in a different light. He paused. Or you can handle this yourself, directly. Handle it how? By contacting Ward yourself, before he contacts you, giving him your account. He held her gaze. The full account, not just the settlement, the 6 years, the control, the day in the shop, the 2-year legal fight, the day he stood in front of you and told you that you were alone. Another pause, measured. That is also a story. A different story than the one your ex-husband is trying to sell. Elena looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. If I tell my story, she said, Marco is in it. Yes. And you are in it. Less than Marco would like, but yes. And I lose the ability to keep any of this private. Yes. She thought about it. She thought about privacy and what it had bought her. 3 years of quiet, 3 years of building, 3 years of keeping the past at a managed distance. She thought about whether that distance had served her, or whether she had simply been living in the shadow of something that Marco still controlled, because she had let it remain unnamed. She thought about the wedding dress and the daughter who had cried a little on the phone and had not been ashamed of crying, because some things were worth being honest about. If I tell my story, she said, I tell it myself. I don't want anyone to manage it or shape it or make it something other than what it is. I would not want that either, Luca said. I would want nothing to do with that. Then I will do it myself. She picked up her tea. I will call Daniel Ward today. Something in Luca's expression, that same shift she had seen before, the one that was not quite softening but was adjacent to it. You are sure, he said. I am completely sure. She held his gaze steadily. I have been careful for 3 years. I have been quiet for 3 years. I have kept everything behind the wall where it could not touch me. And he came into my shop, and he told me that I was alone, and he has apparently decided that even after losing the lawsuit, he has another move. She set the cup down. I am done letting him have moves. I am going to take the board. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very simply, good. She called Daniel Ward at 11 o'clock that morning, from the back room of the shop. He answered quickly, and she could hear, in the first 10 seconds of the conversation, that he was a man who was genuinely careful with information. He did not rush her, did not push, did not try to lead her anywhere. He had the particular stillness of a journalist who has learned that the best stories come to you if you leave room for them. She said, I understand you are working on a story, and that my name may be connected to it. I would like to speak with you before you publish anything. I have an account of my own that I believe is relevant. He said, I was hoping you would call. They arranged to meet the following afternoon, not at the shop, at Deborah's office, because Elena wanted a witness, and because Deborah had said, when Elena called her that afternoon, absolutely yes, I will be there. I have been waiting for someone to tell this story properly for 2 years. Marco, across the city, was not yet aware that anything had moved. He had contacted Daniel Ward 5 days ago through an intermediary, providing what he believed were compelling details about the connection between his ex-wife and a man of questionable reputation. He had been careful, he was always careful, to keep himself at a distance, to let the information speak without his fingerprints on it. He believed he was patient and strategic. He did not know that patience is only a weapon when you are the only one who knows how to wait. The meeting at Deborah's office lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Daniel Ward was younger than Elena had expected, mid-30s, with the kind of focused, unhurried attention that made him seem older. He sat across from Elena and Deborah with a notebook and a recording device that he placed on the table openly, asking permission before starting it. He did not seem surprised by the recording device question. Elena got the impression that he always asked, that asking was a principle rather than a habit. She told him everything. She had decided, in the shop the previous afternoon, that she would not tell a version of the story. She would tell the whole story, the entire shape of it, because she had lived long enough to understand that half-truths had a way of closing doors that the full truth might have left open, and she was done closing her own doors out of caution about what other people might do with her honesty. She told him about the marriage, not in exhaustive detail, but enough. The way control had operated in that house, the way it had been gradual and precise and had never left obvious marks. She told him about the moment she had understood, clearly and without room for argument with herself, that she had to leave. She told him about the bag in the gas station bathroom and her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She told him about the shop, what it had cost her to build and what it had meant. She told him about the lawsuit, 2 years of filings, the money Deborah had billed below market rate, the specific grinding exhaustion of it. She told him about the Tuesday afternoon in October, the pressed coat, the hands in the pockets, the pleasant and patient delivery of a threat. She repeated the words exactly. No one will save you. Deborah, beside her, did not say anything. She had heard the account before, in pieces, over 2 years. She was hearing the whole shape of it now, and her face, which was professionally steady, was not quite as steady as she would probably have liked. Ward asked careful questions. He asked about the timeline. He asked for documentation. Did she have records of the calls from Marco, the texts, the emails from the years of the marriage? She had kept them. She had kept everything. She had always known, somewhere below the surface of daily life, that she might need them. When she was finished, Ward sat for a moment. Then he said, I was given information about you by an indirect source. The information was framed as being about your association with someone whose activities I was already looking into. But what you've described, the 6 years, the lawsuit, the settlement reversal, that's a different story. That's the story. I know, she said. Do you want to tell me more about the association they mentioned? He was careful with the phrasing. He was not a man who used names he had not been given directly. You don't have to. But if it's part of this. It is part of it, she said. And I will tell you exactly what it is. And it is far simpler than whatever you were led to believe. She looked at him directly. I met someone who heard what was said to me in that shop. Someone who had the means to make it clear to my ex-husband that his particular approach to intimidation was not going to be as effective as he had planned. That person asked me for nothing. That person told me directly what they were and what they were not, and I made an informed decision to accept their help. That is the whole of the association. That's it, Ward said. That's it. He wrote something in the notebook. He clicked the pen twice, which she was beginning to recognize as a thinking gesture. The source that contacted me framed it as something significantly larger than that. I know they did. Do you know who the source is? She held his gaze. I have a very strong belief about who it is. I do not have evidence. Ward nodded slowly. Okay. He wrote something else. Ms. Vasquez, the piece I was originally working on. It's broader than any one person. What you've given me today adds a dimension I wasn't expecting, and I think it's the more important story. The coercive control angle, the 2-year legal obstruction, the way someone in your position gets worn down by a system that is technically available to you but practically almost out of reach. That is a story a lot of people will recognize. Elena thought about all the women she had not met, who had sat at kitchen tables going cold with tea, and felt the specific weight of being told they were alone, and believing it. Then write that story, she said. The piece was published 18 days later. She did not know it was coming on the specific day. Deborah called her at 7 in the morning and said simply, It's up. It's good, Elena. Read it. She read it on her phone, sitting on the edge of her bed in the apartment above the bakery, while the ovens hummed below and the early morning city was still half dark outside the window. It was good. Ward had written it with care and precision, the whole arc of it, from the marriage through the 2 years of legal fighting through the Tuesday afternoon in October. He had not sensationalized. He had not needed to. The plain facts, laid out in his direct, clean prose, were enough. He had included the direct quote, "No one will save you," with its full context, and reading it in print, in someone else's writing, Elena felt something she had not expected, a kind of release, as if the words, once named publicly, had lost some of the weight they had been carrying in private. Marco was named, not as the central subject, as the context, the force whose actions had made the story necessary. His name appeared 5 times. Each time it was factually accurate and precise. And accuracy was, Elena had always believed, the sharpest possible instrument. Her name was everywhere. She had agreed to be named. She was done hiding behind a wall that only served to keep Marco's behavior in the dark. Her phone began to go in the first hour after publication. Claire called, crying, which was very Claire. Mrs. Petrov left a voicemail in accented English that said simply, "I read it. You are very brave. Come for dinner on Sunday." Danny from the restaurant sent a text that said just, "I had no idea. I'm sorry. You're incredible." She was touched by all of it, and overwhelmed by none of it, which felt correct. The call she had not expected came at 11 that morning. An unknown number, local area code. She almost did not answer. "Ms. Vasquez," said the woman on the other end, and something in the voice made Elena sit up straighter. The voice was professional, composed, and underneath the composure there was something that Elena, having spent years learning to hear that particular undertone, recognized immediately. "I read the piece this morning. My name is Helen Marsh. I have been in a legal dispute with my ex-partner for 14 months. I read what you wrote about the 2-year lawsuit, and the way the other party's lawyers just keep delaying, keep finding angles, keep waiting for you to run out of money." A pause. "I just needed to call someone who had been where I am. I'm sorry if this is strange." "It is not strange at all," Elena said. She had gone to stand by the shop window. Outside, Clement Street was carrying on as it always did. The cafe, the pharmacy, the ordinary traffic of an ordinary morning in an ordinary city. "How can I help?" She spent 20 minutes on the phone with Helen Marsh, who was a teacher in a different part of the city and who had a daughter, and who was 3 years into a situation that Elena could recognize with her eyes closed. She gave her Deborah's name and number. She said, "Call her. Say I referred you. She will help." After she hung up, she stood at the window for a while. She had not planned to become the person that call went to. She had not planned any of this. The article, the public name, the strange and unexpected role of being someone who had been through the tunnel and come out the other side, and could therefore offer a hand to someone still in it. She had simply told the truth. The truth had, apparently, opened a door she had not known was there. Marco Vasquez saw the article. He saw it because several people sent it to him, because that is what happens when your name is printed in accurate and unflattering proximity to a story that a lot of people are reading. He read it once, quickly, and then he put his phone face down on the glass coffee table and did not pick it up for several hours. He was not named in it as a villain. He was named in it as a fact. That was worse, in certain ways, than being named as a villain. Being named as a villain implied some drama, some scale. Being named as a fact implied that he was simply a piece of context, an element that needed to be understood in order for the rest of it to make sense. He was, in the article's telling, the thing that had happened to a woman before she built something good. His lawyers called that afternoon. He did not return the calls. He was not ruined, in any formal sense. He would continue his life. He would wake up tomorrow in his apartment with its good furniture and its view of the bay. He would go to his office. He would conduct his affairs. But something had changed. The specific equilibrium of power that he had maintained, with such careful patience, for so many years, had shifted. He was visible in a way he had chosen not to be. The story was out in the world now, bearing his name in its accurate and precise way, and it was not going to stop existing. He thought about the cafe on Clement Street. He thought about a well-dressed man sitting at a corner table with a folded newspaper. He would never know exactly who that man had been, or exactly what he had done, or exactly why. He would spend a considerable amount of time over the coming months turning these questions over, and he would not find satisfying answers, because the answers were simpler than he was capable of imagining. They had nothing to do with strategy or counter-strategy or chess moves, and everything to do with a man who had heard 3 sentences through old glass on a windy Tuesday afternoon and had been unable to file them away. The Tuesday after the article was published, Elena went to the cafe at 9. She sat down across from Luca, who had his espresso and his folded newspaper, and she ordered her tea, and they were quiet for a moment, in the comfortable way of people who have established that silence does not need to be filled. "It landed well," he said. "It did. You wrote it yourself, essentially. Ward wrote it. I gave him the truth. They are not the same thing, but they are related." She looked at him. "I got a call the morning after it published. A woman in a similar situation. I gave her Deborah's number." He looked at her. That shift again, behind his eyes. That was the right thing to do. "I thought so." She wrapped her hands around the tea. "I have been thinking about what happened over these past weeks. The whole arc of it. I came to a conclusion." "Tell me." He stood in my shop and told me that no one would come, that I was alone. And he believed it, because for 6 years I had been alone. I had kept everything private, and managed and contained, and I had not reached outside the wall I built, because I thought the wall was protecting me. She looked at the window. Outside, the street was wet from overnight rain, everything clean and reflective. The wall was not protecting me, she said. It was protecting him. It was keeping his behavior in a space where it could not be examined. And the moment I stepped outside it, the moment someone saw what was actually happening and acted on it, the whole structure changed. Not because of anything dramatic, because things that depend on darkness tend to be very fragile when the light touches them. Luca was quiet for a long moment. "That is," he said finally, "a very accurate analysis. I know." She picked up her cup. "I am quite good at analysis." And there it was, the thing that passed between them in that moment, over a cup of tea and a small espresso at a corner table in a cafe on Clement Street. Not declaration, not drama, something quieter and more durable than that. The recognition of two people who had both, by very different roads, arrived at a similar understanding of how the world actually works, and what it requires of you, if you want to live in it honestly. "Next Tuesday," she said, when she stood to leave. "I will be here," he said. She walked back across the street. She unlocked the shop. She took down the "back in an hour" sign, because she had not put it up. She turned on the jazz station. She put the kettle on in the small back room. She had 3 clients today. Mrs. Petrov's grandson was coming to collect the altered jackets, and Danny needed new trousers let out again. And there was a new client, a woman named Alice who had called last week about a bridesmaid dress that needed significant work. She had, in other words, a full day of the quiet and ordinary and sustaining work she had built for herself from scratch, which was not nothing, which was, in fact, everything. Somewhere in a drawer in her apartment, the plain white card with only a phone number sat where she had put it 3 weeks ago. She had not moved it. She was not sure she ever would. Not because she needed it as a lifeline. She had proved to herself, and to the world, that lifelines were not the point, but because the card was a reminder. A small and matte and unremarkable reminder that the story Marco had been telling about her, that she was alone, that she was surrounded by walls, that no one would see her, had been wrong. She had been seen, not saved, not rescued, not handed a resolution she had not earned. She had been seen, at the right moment, by someone who had the capacity to act on what they saw, and she had made a clear and informed choice to accept that, not out of desperation, but out of the cold arithmetic of a woman who understood that strength and solitude are not the same thing, and that asking for help and being weak are not the same thing, and that the wall she had built for protection had become, somewhere along the way, its own kind of cage. She had walked out of the cage, herself. The ovens in the bakery below would start their early morning run again tomorrow at 4. She would lie in bed and hear the hum of them and think of all the bread rising in the dark, patient and warm, becoming something from almost nothing, the way things do when they are given the right conditions. She would sleep through the night. She would wake up. She would unlock the door.